Don't hang up that phone. We've found what you're looking for. Welcome to the Let's Talk Cabling podcast with Chuck Bowser, RCDD. What exactly does RCDD stand for? Registered Communications Distribution Designer. Just the expert you need to ensure your cable plant performs exactly as designed. Now, send the new guy to the truck for a bucket of dial tone and the cable stretchers, while you listen to an informative program on telecommunications.
Welcome to the show where we tackle the tough questions submitted by installers, project managers, engineers, customers, everybody. We are connecting at the human level so that we can connect the world. If you're watching this show on YouTube, would you mind hitting the bell button and the subscribe button to be notified when new content comes out? If you're listening on one of the podcast platforms, would you mind leaving us a 5-star rating? If it's not a 5-star, give me an email. Let me know what I can do to make this show a little better. Those couple little steps helps us take on the algorithm so we can get more information out to educate, encourage, and enrich the lives of everybody in the ICT industry. We also have a live stream Thursday nights on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. And if you happen to miss the live streams, no problem. They are recorded and put on our webpage at letstalkcabling.com. So, as I was mentioned, we're talking about hyperscale data centers. And I'll be the first to admit I have done data centers, but I have not done hyperscale data centers. So this is a new concept for me. So I'm trying to learn along with you guys. We already talked to Tim about how to design them and some of the installation issues that you've got to deal with when doing hyperscale data centers. That got me to thinking, what about labeling? Because there's a lot of stuff that needs to be labeled inside of a hyperscale data center, and there's got to be some issues that are associated with that. And if you've been a member of this audience for any period of time, you know I've got an expert council, and the first person who joined the expert council was Todd from Brother Solutions. Todd, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Thanks for, it's a pleasure. So thank you again for graciously having me back, Chuck.
My pleasure. And so tell us, since the last time you've been on the show, I've gained more subscribers and stuff. So some people may not know who you are, or what you do, or why should we even listen to you about labeling? What makes you an expert?
Well, I tell you what, talking about the gaining, you may have gained supporters. I've gained 30 pounds, I think, since the last time I was on the show. So, a little bit about me. I started off as a contractor, actually working out in the field and building data centers and so forth and whatnot. And then I went into the manufacturing world. So I've been with Brother now for almost 10 years now. And I'm the regional sales manager. I cover everything west of the Mississippi, hypothetically, but I'm basically global. I'm worldwide. So anything labeling whatsoever. I've become what people tell me I'm an expert now. But again, that's argumentable. But anyway, Brother Mobile Solutions. We deal directly, and Brother's been around for 60 some years, and there's two different sides of Brother. One is you can walk into a big box store and you can buy a small little handheld printer, but that's got nothing really to do with what we're talking about here. So about 10 years ago, Brother went into the industrial side of the fence, specifically targeting low voltage and electrical contractors. And this is where we sit today.
Yeah, you and I kind of talked about that a little bit when I was on, I think it was when I was on your show. And you need to talk about your show in just a second too, so people know about it. Because I mentioned that how some technicians will go to that big box store and buy that consumer grade labeler that you guys make, and then expect that to work like the industrial grade one, and it doesn't. It just doesn't.
No. So the big differences are, as long as you're putting a Brother label on there, thank you. I sincerely appreciate it. But the actual task of doing cable wraps and patch panels and faceplates and old school 110 punch down blocks and flags, those are specific to what you see behind me here. Whereas the consumer grade printers themselves are meant for files and folders and just general everyday labeling. So the whole idea behind The industrial side of brother is to one and done scenario. Get the job done right the first time, and don't go back unless there's a move, add, and change. If you're getting paid to go back and do it. So that's what we're all about on the industrial side.
Yeah. So tell us, and I know this, and maybe some of my members know. Tell us a little bit about your show that you do.
All right. So BS with Todd. When this whole pandemic thing started, I thought, I was traveling 80% of the time, Chuck, and I thought, what am I going to do now? And so I started with a series of instructional videos that got a lot of hits on YouTube, and I thought, okay, let's kind of expand on this. And let's be brother labeling specific. So it took a while to get the name of the show past legal and HR, but we ended up calling it BS with Todd. And those that know me on an intimate level, one-to-one level, know that there's a lot of BS that comes out of Todd. So BS with Todd stands for Brother Solutions. And it's all about labeling. It's all about how labeling fits in to the low voltage sector. And so we're on yesterday, as a matter of fact, we celebrated our 43rd episode.
Nice.
I mean, unbelievable. And so I thought it'd be good for a couple of weeks until, things cleared up, the air cleared up outside. And actually, this is a platform that I think is here to stay as long as everyone out there has me. So, and I appreciate you. You've been on the show a couple of times, Chuck, with your expert knowledge, and it's always a pleasure to have you. And so, hopefully this stuff continues.
It's going to continue because I ain't going to stop whether nobody's watching or not. And the thing I love about your title is it's a double entendre, right? So BS, Brother Solutions, BS, the other thing. Because when I first saw that title, I was like, how did he get his company to approve that? And then it hit me. Wait a minute, Brother Solutions, BS. I was like, oh my God, that's brilliant.
Well, I tell you, what's funny, Chuck, about that is that I think it was the first episode, and I was explaining to whoever was watching me, and I never know who's watching me. Well, I always know HR and legal are watching me. I know that for a fact. But I actually was explaining the whole BS thing, and I did utter those two words that you're not supposed to utter, the other BS. And so right off the bat, I got a note. I've got to be careful, but I think that's one of the reasons why people tune in is they're wondering, how can he get away with it? And obviously, I push the envelope all the time, but at the end of the day, it's all about education.
Yes.
Right? It's about industry education. We both have a good time doing this.
Yes. My favorite part of your show is the Toddisms.
Oh, you can see one on the shirt behind me. And I guess, just out of the back, or that, out of my mouth, I came up with, and I didn't even think about this, but I came up with the word cassettability. I can't even tell you where that came from, but obviously people like that, and they put it on the new shirt. So these things just kind of roll, and that's the beauty of doing these live shows. I've got to be very careful about what I say.
Yes.
But some they just happen. So anyway, that's pretty funny stuff.
It is fun. I love your show. I enjoy it. And when I when I can't watch it live, because sometimes I'm teaching, I always make sure I go back and watch the recorded version of it, because I love your show.
www.bswithtodd.com. So we've got all 43 episodes on there, and many more to come. So thank you very much for the plug, Chuck.
Oh, my pleasure. So let's talk about hyperscale data centers. You heard my intro. I've got data center experience, but I've never even done a hyperscale data center. And somebody asked me a question on TikTok about it, and that's why I reached out and I did that one show with Tim. And as soon as I finished the show, I was like, wait a minute. There's a whole bunch of, you got fibers in there that go up to 6,000 strand count. You must have a gazillion and a bazillion. There's a Chuckism for you, gazillion, bazillion patch panels and patch cords. And what about labeling, right? So I was like, oh, I got to call Todd. I got to see if Todd can help me clarify some of the stuff. So what do you see would be the challenges of labeling in a hyperscale data center?
I really don't think there's a lot more challenges per se than, a regular data center. I think that I've got a couple of, I'd like to think, innovative ideas, because you got a lot more widgets, doodads, cables, fibers, connectors, in a smaller space, if you will, right? And so it still follows ANSI, TIA 606 standards. Everything that's included in there goes into a hyperscale data center, Chuck. But challenge-wise, these things still need to be labeled. So whether you're talking about racks or cabinets or runways, rackways, ladder racks, grounding, bonding, fire penetrations, fire stop, your cables, your wires, your active and passive electronics, all right, your patch panels, your workstation outlets, if you have them, your disconnects, all of that still needs to be labeled. So the general rule of thumb is that if you follow, and I am a firm believer in preaching the gospel of 606C. If you follow those guidelines, you're going to have the vast majority of that labeled, thought out ahead of time, which makes the job a lot easier. But there's going to be certain things that you don't know about labeling. And if in question, right, label it. There's nothing out there that says you can't label this. There isn't. There's nothing out there that says you can't label it. And so a lot of it comes down to liability too. If you think it needs a label on it, put a label on it, for gosh sakes. It's not going to hurt my feelings. All right. But again, I don't think anything really changes as far as the foundation of labeling in there. But at some point during this, I want to talk about an idea I had that I think may help those labeling, and with that vast amount of information that needs to go on those labels. So
I don't know what HD is, but my doctor says I've got 80 of them. And so my brain was thinking as you were talking, and I was listening, so I'm multitasking, right? And I got to thinking, in a hyperscale data center, there's only so much room on the patch panels and stuff. That's a lot of information that you're trying to put on in a small little footprint, right?
Well,
what's a good solution for that?
All right. So some of the things that I've seen, and high density patch panels are becoming more and more popular. And you and I were talking about this, and we've talked about this several times. And I'll give you a great scenario. So I was out, I'm not going to mention where I was. I'm not going to mention the product that was used, all right? But I will mention that it was a high density patch panel. Now, the difference between a high density patch panel and a standard patch panel is the amount of room that you have to label that patch panel. And so typically a 3/8 inch tape or a 9mm tape will suffice. And with the new HD patch panels, one of the issues that I saw firsthand was that you can't take that 3/8 inch tape and it won't fit above that high density patch panel. There's just no room. So what I saw was a contractor printing off on a 3/8 inch label and taking their snips and cutting off the top portion and the bottom portion to fit inside that area. And so I called the general foreman over and I said, it works at the end of the day, that works, but do you realize how much additional labor that's taking and how much tape you're wasting at the end of the day? And he had no clue. And so, one of the things that the brother offers, and I do believe still to this day, we're the only manufacturer that offers this, it's a 9/64 tape. Try saying that fast 3 times, a 9/64 tape. And so it was originally developed for a CD spline, compact disc, for those out there that don't know what CD. Maybe you could put that in one of your acronyms and that'd be funny to see the answers. Yep. And so they were about ready to discontinue. Brother was about ready to discontinue this tape. And it was right about the same time that a manufacturer just came out with a angled 48 port high density. And I thought, what the heck, I'm going to try it. It fit in there perfectly. And you don't need the magnifying glass to put in there. And some of those patch panels come with little magnifiers. So anyway, to make a long story short, they were using a competitor out in this site in Arizona. And after I showed them this particular tape, they're no longer using my competitor. And
Nice.
so again, there's one of the things that you can consider when doing a hyper data center, if you will. All right. Or again, just a lot of information in one space. Utilize that. It will save so much time and labor. And that 9/64 tape is just one of the things that you can do in the hyperscale data center arena. So that definitely helps. And yeah, that is a little bit different. Again, you still follow, the 606C standards, but you're using a material that is going to end up saving you lots of time, lots of money, and it's going to save you headaches at the end of the day. So
yeah, when you sit there and you were talking about them cutting, the estimator in me was immediately thinking, how much time per label? How many labels? What's that? What's the labor value on that? I mean, just that was the estimator in me coming out, right? And here's probably something that you may not have thought of, or you might have just hadn't verbalized it yet. You probably already have, because I know you have contractor experience. Most customers equate quality visually. So I don't care how good you think you are with a pair of snips, you're not going to cut that thing perfectly. And now you got a bunch of tapes and it looks like it's been cut, and it just looks like it was just, why not use a Sharpie? Right? It's just not good quality. It's just not good quality.
I still see Sharpies out there,
Yes.
And there was one contractor in particular that just very stubborn. And I mentioned that we had this tape, and like you said, if you don't make this cut straight, or even if you take this label and you put it on the patch panel crooked, I'm very anal about that. And I can see it from a mile away.
Right.
And so my viewpoint is that if I can see it, my customer can see it.
Right.
And so this particular mule-headed customer didn't really want to go down the path of the 9/64. So I said, listen, I'm going to help you out. Instead of using, if you're not going to invest in Brother, instead of using your snips, go buy one of those old-fashioned paper cutters. That's my gift to you, Mr. Customer. And so actually, I think they did. But it is what it is. And you're absolutely right. The same with face plates and cutting the end off the labels on face plates and trying to make it fit. You're better off just using the right tool for the job to begin with, because your customer will see those imperfections. And what does that mean? Somebody's going to get a phone call, and it's going to be on that contractor's dime to go out there and fix these imperfections. So I'm a big fan of one and done. The other thing I'm thinking about, Chuck, on these hyperscale data centers is that everything, at least in my mind, should be done ahead of time. So everything should be some type of takeoff on your panel schedule. All right. The takeoff on, if you got workstation outlets, and there are some here and there, your cable wraps, everything. But one of the benefits that I see is do everything ahead of time on an Excel spreadsheet. The beauty about the Brother system and the handheld system is that if you can do everything ahead of time, you can actually import that database into one of our printers. And the reason why I say that's very, very important, to this day, I still see when I go into a data center environment, somebody standing there, and it could be one of my printers, it could be a competitor, but they're hand typing everything in. And you know what? It goes back to the old snip thing. Is that, why are you doing this when you can basically just choose what you want to print from a database, right? And then if you have to make a change, you can make a change on the spot. So specifically in a hyperscale data center where you have all this information, I would highly suggest that you do everything ahead of time on an Excel spreadsheet, and then take that Excel spreadsheet, import it into one of my machines, select whatever you're doing, whether it be a cable wrap or patch panel, pull from the database and hit the print button. So again, there's a little bit of time involved in prepping for the job, but that versus standing there doing it manually. And again, I see it all the time still to this day. I think that's important too, is you're planning for the labeling. And every time you do something on the fly, that's additional labor. All right. And, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I'm still a tightwad. I was a very successful contractor back in the day because I was a tightwad. And so I still look at all these things, and any type of prep work you can do ahead of time or automate the labeling process is going to be huge at the end of the day.
I would think most people would agree with this statement. You know, as compared to typing on, with your thumbs on a labeling machine per a keyboard, it's going to be a lot faster on a keyboard.
Absolutely.
It definitely boils down to, exactly how much money it's going to take to do this stuff. I know you guys make labels for doing cabling and stuff, right?
Mhm.
Let me ask you this: in your hyperscale data centers, right? You could have fiber a cable up to a 6,000 strand count. Does that pose any kind of difficulties or anything additional that, for as far as doing cable labels?
No, no, you know, so when if you're doing a trunk, you know, you can actually do a cable wrap on one of my printers of, you can do a 26-foot cable wrap.
Holy cow!
Oh, I know, I know. I go back to our old days, and you know, when we were pulling 1,200 pair, we had the old tugger set up, and we're pulling 1,200 pair, you know, through the conduit manhole system. But you know, I remember those cables being this big, right? Those trunk cables. And so the beauty about our machines is that there's a specific button for wrapping cables, right? And you can choose the length that you want to wrap. You can choose the OD that you want to wrap. And then there's some presets in there, such as coax. You can choose your gauge of wire. There's Cat 5, there's Cat 6, there's Cat 6A in there. So there's all these different templates for cable wraps in there. Now, where it gets, I guess, arduous, all right, is when you start breaking these things out. All right. And everything up to a certain point, you can use a traditional cable wrap. And when I say traditional cable wrap, you know, I'm talking about something like this, Chuck, where it's just a standard cable wrap that you peel off like yay, and you wrap
Mhm.
it around. It's no big deal. But when you get down to some of the smaller ODs, some of the smaller strands, as you're breaking those things out, I don't really suggest using a standard cable wrap. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to use either a flag, or what's becoming very popular is our heat shrink. And the heat shrink, when you get down to a small OD, the beautiful thing about that is that it prints off on a flat tube. You can print your identifier onto the shrink tube, and then you just slide it over preterm, slide it over that connector. All right, do your termination, pull that back as you're doing your termination. When you actually connect it, then move that back to that area. Now, that versus flags, I'm not a big fan of flags, never have been. Number one, for me, I've got no patience, and you have to mirror up that flag perfectly so there's no adhesive, or so it doesn't look like this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The other thing that I'm not a fan of flags is that when you get a bunch of flags together, it looks like this, and it's hard
Right.
to identify. Now, are flags necessary in certain situations? Yes. Does it mean that I have to be a fan of them? No. Does it mean that I think there's a better solution out there? Yes. I would highly recommend using our heat shrink. Again, it prints off on a flat tube. You can pull from the database just like you can any other thing. It's going to print out a sequence of those particular identifiers. I suggest to print off a single long tube of this, and just use your snips and cut as you go along. That's probably the easiest way. But again, I'm a big fan of using those, the heat shrink, if you will. Well, sleeves, we'll call them sleeves, but you don't heat them in this case. If you do have to heat them, our heat shrink is 2-to-1. There are times I wouldn't recommend it on any fiber, but there are times when you do have to heat those. But again, that could be another solution. So there's really nothing complicated until you get to your point of termination, or your LIU, if you will.
So
So
another thought that crossed my mind is, hyperscale data centers, especially if now the industry's been shifting to not doing raised floor in data centers, but there's still a bunch of them out there. So you got cable tray underneath the floor, and hyperscale, you got big bulky cables, lots of them. What about maybe the label getting rubbed off when it's being pulled through the cable tray system?
Been there, done that. Been there, done that. So, as a contractor, I always fought that battle. And it always comes in after the fact. So you could be done with the job, get it all signed off, turn in your submittals, collect your check. At some point, if you're not using the right label, somebody's going to get to an area where they can see that label has been rubbed off, has been scratched, has been torn. Then the contractor is going to get a call. And again, on your own dime, you're going to have to go out there. And again, post-installation is different than actually pre or installation, right? Installation and pre-installation, you have all sorts of access to get to where that label may have rubbed off or fallen off. Post-installation, not so easy. So the whole idea behind the Brother process is that everything that we make, except for the super narrow tape I talked about before, that is not laminated, but everything we do is going to be laminated. And so that's a real good point, is that when you're going through a tray system, and let's say that you're doing a label inside the tray, all right? Or let's say you're doing a rough-in label, which I recommend rough-in labels versus Sharpie, right? When you're pulling these cables through, if you're not using the right tape, they're going to scratch, they're going to scuff, they're going to fall off. So the beautiful thing about Brother is that every tape that we have is laminated, which means scratch resistant, scuff resistant, water resistant, chemical resistant, you name it. It's a tough tape. And the only way it's going to come off is when you physically peel it off. So again, you're talking about really labor, and you're talking about liability too. And I'm a huge fan of talking about liability, because again, if a label is missing that should have been there, guess who's going to get a phone call? So you want to make sure when you put a label on that it stays on until you physically pull it off. So make sure it is a laminated label up in the ceiling. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mentioned many times before. You mentioned just a minute ago about rolling a truck back out to an existing job to fix something, and most technicians don't really realize the impact of that, right? Because when you, as an estimator and a project manager, I know what that means, right? If you're rolling that truck to that job site to go back to redo something, number one, you're losing money because you're paying that guy to go back to redo something that should have been done. Number two, you're losing the revenue from that guy who should be over on that job over there making money. And number three, which most people don't think about, you are losing customer confidence. And you can't put a number on that. You can't.
That's a good point.
And if the customer has confidence in you, right, and you and I both know this, they'll recommend you and your products and your services to other people, right?
Absolutely.
If they don't have confidence in you, they're not going to say nothing, and you could lose out on potential even future sales.
Yeah, that's a very good point. That's something I didn't even think about. But yeah, if the only calls you're getting are calls to come out and fix things, you're not going to get the next bid invitation. So that's a good point.
Yeah, absolutely. So one final thing. So I'm thinking about hyperscale data centers and lots of information and labeling and racks and rows, and again, very little space. And I know you guys have this. So I'm just going to give you the opportunity to talk about it. QR codes.
Oh, my favorite subject these days, and that's I didn't know you were going to bring that up. And so that was, I'm sitting there kind of biting my tongue, because that is very exciting to me. And QR codes have been around for a long time, right? And they started off years ago, and they never took off, just never took off. And you needed specific readers for them. And now all of our iPhones have it, and there's free apps out there that they're able to read these things. And there's different variations. You got your 1D barcode. Your 1D barcode, Chuck, is something like, we're all used to something like that, which is a UPC code or EAN or something like that.
Don't you have to register those though?
What's that?
Don't you have to register the barcodes?
No. I mean, as far as, so they're just very limited to the amount of information you can put on there.
Okay.
Right. So Brother actually prints all these out of our machines. All right. And you pick the protocol as the end user. You pick the protocol, and it could be a 1D barcode. It could be like a UPC code for shipping and handling. But they can only handle up to 85 characters. Right. And again, but that's also limited to what type of symbology that you use. So, let's talk about QR codes, 2D, if you will. So the beautiful thing about a QR code is that if you're only using either alpha or numeric, it's got to be one or the other, you can fit 7,089 characters
Holy
into
cow.
QR code. All right.
Holy
And
cow.
I know it's absolutely amazing. So if you're using a combination of alpha and numeric, it's a little over 4,200 pieces of information. So imagine this in a hyperscale data center, walking up to a server rack, if you will, and inside of a server rack, you got your active, your passive electronics. You could have some grounding in there. You can have your UPCs. You got power. Everything. But what about walking up to the door of one of these server cabinets? And let's say I'm a greenhorn tech and I don't know what the hell I'm doing or where I am, and I'm asked to go help this customer out. I really don't know what's inside this cabinet or rack, right? I don't know what type of fiber it is right off the top of the head. I don't know what the installation date was. I don't know if there was a maintenance date on it. I don't know, what type of cable or connectors. I'm a greenhorn. So what about going up to a barcode like this, scanning it, and everything you need to know is right there. Everything you need to know. Now, let's talk about cable management, all right? So a typical, and I've showed you before, a typical wire wrap, cable wrap is going to have alpha and numeric characters. You get inside of a data center, could be any data center, and there's lots of hops and jumps from, the row H over there, rack A over to row Z, rack B, but there's a lot of hops in between. What about the ability to basically, if you're at a port, the ability to scan a barcode and it shows every hop to get to, from point A to point B. Now
That's
imagine
huge. That's huge.
Well, imagine the amount of toning and tracing, all right? And again, the record keeping is involved too. That's all part of 606C. But you know what? There's human error. Now there's human error that goes into barcoding too. But just sitting down and looking at all this information or finding this information can be arduous and time consuming. But to walk up and scan something like that, and it tells you everything about where that cable came from, when it was installed, to the last time it was maintained, it's huge. So for runway systems, where does that tray come from? Where's it going? All right, you can have something like this on the side of a rack or runway system, all right, or you can have a QR code. Right. And you can even combine your alphanumerics with the QR code. So I am a huge fan. As far as readers are concerned, they're on your phone.
I was going to ask that. So I was going to say, because I know if I take my cell phone, because I've got my company cell phone's an Android and my personal one is an iPhone. It doesn't matter which one I choose, but if I put it on the camera and I put it on a QR code, I was at a restaurant on my last business trip, the only business trip I took so far this year, right? And they had a QR code embedded into the table, and that's how you pulled up the menu. You didn't, and then of course, me being an old boomer, I'm like, I need the menu, and I go, it's right there. I'm like, I'm looking on the table, I'm like, where? She goes, oh no, the QR code, and I was like, oh. And then so my question is, so if you do a QR code on the brother labeler, right? Do you have to have does it just pull that information from that QR code on your phone, or do you need a special software to?
No. So the way it works is that you can set it up two ways. You can either manually input that information into that QR code. And then what that QR code is, takes that information, it may be a copy paste, right? So there was one time where I was, explaining how this QR code works, and I took a whole page from, I forget what book it was, and I embedded this in a QR code. Now, what happens when you scan your phone over there in picture mode, on the screen, it brings up that chapter of the book that I was reading. It was just a copy paste, okay? So it reads alpha and numeric, no matter how you put them together, all right? So you can copy and paste from an Excel spreadsheet, a CSV, a Word document. The other thing you can do is that if you have as-built drawings of that cabinet, let's say that somebody's done a great job in putting together a schematic for that particular cabinet, you can use a hyperlink. So just embed the hyperlink, right? have that sitting out there on the cloud somewhere. And then as soon as you bring up and scan over that QR code, it takes you right to that as-built schematic, where whether it's a rack, a cabinet, or anything, it pulls up that schematic right on your phone. And
so you know, this is why I love talking to you, because my brain, because you and I share a lot of similar experiences and career experiences, and it just got me thinking. You know, how many times and how many times have you ever done a job where you provided as-built for the customer that they promptly lose a week after you give it to them? So now we thought we were a slick contractor, so we would give the customer the as-built. We'd have another set printed up, laminate those, put those on the wall in the telecom room, so they were always there. Those would disappear. If you have a QR code that's got a hyperlink, solves the problem. No additional printing. Oh my God, that is slick.
I know it's a beautiful thing. I have these. I have a company in Des Moines, Iowa, that builds car washes. And when they build these custom cabinet boxes for the car washes that are sealed, they don't want the seal to be broken unless absolutely necessary. So anybody that goes out to work on the box, what they'll do is they'll put a QR code on there, brother QR code. They'll scan that box and it shows everything inside that box. And so they know what they're getting into. So again, it really is limitless, the amount of stuff you can do with QR codes, and specifically with our industry. It really, and it's mind blowing. So the old way of thinking about cable wraps and patch panels and so forth and whatnot, you can still use the alphanumeric, but use a micro QR code when you're doing a cable wrap. It's still okay to do this, but if you want, put a micro QR code on there with all that information. So combine the two if you want to, but you have that ability. The other thing I would say, Chuck, in a hyperscale data center, and really this is, unless you have more questions, I wanted to touch on this, is that Brother just launched a new safety signage. And safety signage is huge in any data center. And typically what happens is the contractor will go out and they contact their local distributor, and they'd say, you know what, sell me 10 of these, and maybe, you know what, give me a few of these, and they're $5 a piece. But so safety labeling inside of any data center, whether it be hyperscale or beyond, is absolutely huge. So Brother now is in that market. We just launched that actually 7 days ago, but that is also, now what that does is it allows that same low voltage contractor to not only label the components we're used to, but they have the ability to produce these labels as far as fiber warning labels or pinch points or anything else. So again, that's something new I wanted to point out, and that is part of any data center environment as well. That's
an additional revenue stream. Gotta love that.
Oh,
gotta
absolutely.
Love that.
Sure it is.
Yeah.
Sure it is.
Well, very cool. Mr. Todd, you have definitely shed a lot of light on labeling hyperscale data centers. I appreciate your knowledge and your experience. I appreciate you being on the show.
Again. Yeah, thank you, Chuck. Appreciate you.
All right, man. Take care.
That's it for this episode of today's podcast. We hope you were able to learn something. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future content. Also, leave a rating so we can help even more people learn about telecommunications. Until next time, be safe.